Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Jonathan Capehart of the Washington Post and MSNBC, and I'd like to welcome you all to this discussion about LGBT equality in America. And of course, it is brought to you by Google. Well, we can applaud Google. Yes, applaud Google. Without Google, we are nothing these days, it seems. 42 years after the infamous Stonewall riots, it seems that not a day goes by when Americans aren't exposed to some advancement or setback or pop culture reference associated with the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. As you know, the white hot spotlight is such that some people believe that Americans may have arrived at a cultural tipping point with respect to the acceptance of LGBT people and the issues critical to their equality. But is that true? So, obviously, that's why these people are here, to answer the question of whether that's true. Our host today is the Human Rights Campaign, which all of you know, and if you don't know, I'm about to tell you, is the largest LGBT civil rights organization in the country. And it's because of HRC and Google that we are here with this fantastic panel to talk about this, well, to answer that question and to talk about this topic. And the man seated next to me is Chad Griffin, president of the Human Rights Campaign, prior to his move to HRC, which was just two months ago. So then you know Chad, so I don't need to say anything else. But Chad, prior to Chad's move to HRC, he was the founding board member of the American Foundation for Equal Rights, or AFER as it's known, the sole sponsor of the Proposition 8 lawsuit. He is personally responsible for recruiting the legal team of Ted Olson and David Boies, who successfully argued the case. And Griffin is also a veteran of the Clinton White House communications team. Do I really need to introduce the person to Chad's left? Campbell Brown. Campbell Brown is an Emmy Award-winning TV anchor and journalist who has reported on the LGBT community for years and years and years, first on NBC's Weekend Today and later on CNN, where she hosted her primetime show, Campbell Brown. This year, she was asked to read the part of a broadcast journalist in the play 8, which portrays the legal argument and witness testimony of the Perry v. Schwarzenegger trial over California's Proposition 8. Next to her, Ben Jealous. Ben Jealous is the president and CEO of the NAACP. And Ben, I would like to say, along with Julian Bond, prime movers in getting the NAACP to do its historic endorsement of marriage equality earlier this year. Ben, at the age of 35, so when Ben was named the head of the NAACP in 2008, he was just 35 years old. He's the youngest person to lead the century-old organization. Ben started his career as a community organizer in Harlem in 1991 with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund while working his way through college. His bio is much, much longer, but I'm not going to read it because we're running out of time. That's what you get when you have too many accomplishments, Ben. Next to Ben is actress, comedian, and author Aisha Tyler. Aisha was the first African-American to host E's Talk Soup and is currently co-host of CBS's Emmy-nominated show The Talk, as well as the voice of Lana Kane in the Smash animated series Archer. Now, here are two interesting facts about Aisha. One, her weekly podcast, Girl on Guy, is constantly ranked among the top podcasts on iTunes. And I didn't know this about you, Aisha, but she's also the reigning Celebrity Jeopardy champion. So I had no idea. I mean, that's...
Heady space.
And Anna Greenberg. Anna Greenberg is a leading pollster and an expert in survey research methodology with nearly 15 years experience. Since joining the firm Greenberg, Quinlan, Rosner in 2001, Greenberg has worked with many elected officials in a wide range of NGOs and advocacy groups. Her areas of expertise include women in politics, LGBT rights, religion and politics, healthcare policy, and drug policy reform. So let's welcome them all to the panel. So I want to start with you, Chad, since you're one of our hosts, and you're seated right here. So could you talk a little bit about some of the major victories and accomplishments of the LGBT community in the last few decades? I mean, so much has happened within the last 5 years. Yeah. Talk a little bit about where we were and where we are and where we might be going.
Absolutely. If you just look at the last couple of years, you don't even have to go back 5 years, but if you look at what's been accomplished with this president in office, whether it's the signing of the hate crimes legislation, or whether it's signing the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or the more than 30 administrative actions that have happened in this administration that few people even know about or talk about. Things like requiring domestic partnership and hospital visitation. For hospitals across this country that receive federal funding, you now have to recognize partners to make medical decisions. And that's throughout the administration. But perhaps as significant as anything, this president coming out in support of marriage equality sends a message across this country and perhaps the world to the LGBT young person in America that's growing up being told that he or she is a second-class citizen in this country, and having the President of the United States, the first President of the United States, to express his views in the way that he did it in support for marriage equality really sends a tremendous message to the LGBT young person that he or she can grow up with the exact same dreams and aspirations as his or her peers or siblings and friends at school can. One more thing I'll say about this. If you look, when we filed the Perry v. Schwarzenegger case, which is the case led by Ted Olson and David Boies in California, which is before the Supreme Court here shortly, there was not a single poll in the country that had support for marriage equality over 50%. Believe me, we tried desperately looking at ways that we could say a majority of Americans support marriage equality. Today, there are more than a dozen polls in just the last 18 months that show that support for marriage equality is more than 50%. Finally, a majority of Americans support marriage equality in this country, and that's tremendous. That's why I think we have opportunities to win at the ballot box this November in the 4 states.
And part of one of the attributes of leadership is knowledge, and the only way leaders can figure out what the right thing to do is or the right thing to say is if they read about it or see it on television, and Campbell, you've been at the forefront of that. How do you think widespread coverage of LGBT issues has played into the incredible advancement that the community has made, not just in the last 10 years, but even in the last 5 years?
And I would even say in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, so much has changed in the last 2 or 3 years. I think we were part of the problem for a long time because the media covered this as though it were a political issue. It's like, well, where do you stand on marriage equality? And it took an evolution in the media that is still ongoing, I would say, because a lot of people are still treating this as a political issue. Where are you on marriage equality? It's not a political issue. It is a civil rights issue. I think we all know that, and I think it's incumbent upon the media, regardless. I mean, it's hard to say this because the media has changed so much and become so partisan in a way that it wasn't even a couple of years ago. But I would say across the board, it is incumbent upon the media to call it that, to treat it that way, to begin covering that way, and stop asking where you are on marriage equality, but why are you not supporting marriage equality? What is your justification?
So the polls that Chad was talking about, what accounts for sort of the rapid change in the level of support for not just marriage equality but LGBT issues in general? I mean, is it because the media is finally starting to report on the issues and on the story in a way that is I would say, personally speaking, more fair, more democratic in the little d?
So first of all, you're right. There has been incredibly rapid change. If you look at attitudes about race and gender, and you think about the scope of change, and we're not there yet on either of those issues, but we're talking 50, 60, 100 years, and you look at LGBT issues, we're talking 15 years to get to the place where we are now. And it's not just marriage equality. On ENDA, don't ask, don't tell, hate crimes, bullying, you've got upwards of 60, 70, 80%, depending on where you do the poll, supporting, that sort of, that legislation. You even have, for example, 70% of Republicans support ENDA. It's non-controversial. Really, marriage is the only thing that's left that is controversial, and that's at 50, 51% support. So it's unbelievable, the scale and pace of change. And I do think some of it has to do with pop culture, starting with Ellen, and Will and Grace, and a whole set of sort of, whether it's on TV or in the movies or, now certainly in social media, has created a comfort level, and certainly people who are younger have grown up in that sort of environment. But I think there's something that's more important, which is people coming out of the closet and talking to their families and talking to their friends has increased the comfort level with a lot of people who previously either were intolerant or uncomfortable. And when we do work on, for example, these marriage amendments that are on the ballot around the country, and you look at what predicts support for marriage equality, it's how many gay friends you have, how close you are to them, right? It's not just knowing someone, it's not an acquaintance, it's being friends with them. And if you've ever talked to someone who's gay about these issues. Now, in terms of change, that is, and so if you look at, people coming out of the closet, that has also increased exponentially. So I think the media and pop culture plays a role, but we shouldn't overstate how important it is to be in relationship with people who are gay and how common that is now. And that there are very few people left in this country who don't know and like and are in relationship with people who are gay. Mm-hmm. And it creates empathy and understanding in ways that, a political ad just cannot do, or a TV show cannot do.
Okay, so, and you gave a terrific answer, which creates a problem for me, because now I don't know which one to go to first, because you touched on two things there that are very important. One is pop culture, and the other one is sort of the one-on-one connection people have with other people and how that plays into moving support for LGBT equality. So I'm going to mentally flip.
Can I speak to it? Actually, just because.
Well, wait. I'm going to flip a coin in my head. Okay, and you win. So, Aisha, so in terms of pop culture, what role does pop culture and Hollywood and television and all of that play in making people feel comfortable or even knowledgeable about gay people when they might be living in cities or towns or parts of the country where the only gay person they know is a character on a screen?
Right. Well, I think there are two answers to that, and they're both personal for me, obviously, because I'm in the entertainment industry, but also because I have people in my life in that situation. So, I think obviously artists and the artistic community have always been at kind of the forefront, the vanguard of bringing new ideas and expressing kind of. Fringe is not the right word, but expressing maybe at the first unpopular or unconventional ideas. And what's been great about Hollywood is that Hollywood has always pushed to bring those ideas to the fore, to make them popular, to make them conventional. And I think it's true. I think shows like Will and Grace, and it's interesting. I think that fictional characters are important, but I think real life characters have been more important. Somebody like Ellen, who was a real person to people, was not a creation, was not, kind of, the characters in Will and Grace were fabulous, and there was an intimacy there, but they still felt like they were drawn characters. When you see people, you see Ellen or you see Anderson coming out, you see these people that you've respected and you've known, and you see that the consequences for their choices are much more dramatic than watching a girl and a guy who are best friends in New York and have some kind of bottomless pit of wealth with which they buy this incredible apartment but never
right,
go to work.
This huge apartment in New York.
A huge apartment, and attorneys can't afford apartments like that in New York. Come on, I know attorneys in New York. It doesn't happen. They live in hovels. So there's that, but I also think that there's been this through thread of, and I think the thing that stinks about the idea that a lot of it's been driven by people coming out is that it somehow has always been incumbent on the gay community to enlighten other people. I think that's the part of this equation that I think really sucks. It shouldn't be gay people's responsibility to help straight people figure it out, but for a long time it has been. And for me, I see that there's been this thread of people coming out and people being faced to force the fact that whatever preconceptions they had about the gay community were wrong because somebody that they already loved, now they, it's like I could never know or love a gay person. Well, you know what? You probably already do. And I think in that way, people are forced immediately and with rapidity and almost like a train wreck. I've got to confront these issues right now. They're in my face. I have to make a choice. And that's really forced people forward. But about people who live in a town where they don't know gay people, I've had two people very close to me come out in the last few years. My sister, who is 37 and was married with 2 children, and my niece, who's 16, who lives in a very small town. And so even though everybody in that small town watches shows like Ellen and Will and Grace and a million other shows that are on TV now that have gay characters, here was someone now in this tiny town who was gay, who came out at 16, and I was shocked at how intensely people still reacted to that step in a time where I think the rest of us assume, oh, come on, who isn't out now? I mean, it's ridiculous,
Right.
So I think that art has played a part. I think it's still very difficult for young people to come out. And I think that it's incumbent upon straight people, which is why I'm involved in things like the Human Rights Campaign. It's incumbent upon us to make it easier and to create a welcoming environment and to support those people and to defend them. And that's been my role, both actively in terms of the way that I work in the public eye, but also in my personal life, to say to the other people in my life who reacted negatively, it's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think those of us that are on this side have to be in that vanguard with gay people. We can't just leave it to them to break the doors down.
Mm-hmm. And so Ben, I don't know if you're a mind reader, but you can probably guess where my question is going. We've talked about all of this hopeful stuff about where the country is going on LGBT rights, how much support has grown for LGBT rights and marriage equality among Americans in general. But when it comes to African Americans, there still is this sense, this feeling that the African American community is the last community to really get on board with this. Why is that? Why? And let me add, is this question over? Whoops.
Well, let's have that removed.
I'm gonna stand and talk.
Okay. Or is the question about concern about support for LGBT equality in the African American community overstated?
Look, I think there's a couple of dynamics that should be acknowledged. One is that...
Now you have 3 chairs.
Yeah, I just want to say, Chad, your staff is very service-oriented. I appreciate that. Couldn't treat a brother better, so thank you. Look, I think there's a couple things we need to acknowledge, right? First of all, when the NAACP came out on marriage equality, the vote, there's probably 52 out of 64 board members in the room, only 2 were opposed. Every single religious leader in the room, and we have probably, close to a dozen on our board, was in support. There were, 12 who weren't there, and there was one religious leader who wasn't there, and he was opposed, and he's since left the board. He's the only religious leader who anybody's talked about, right? The 12 who were in support, including one guy who was the just past presiding bishop of his entire denomination, had no attention. So I think part of the portrayal lies with the media, right, who only goes for the conflict and doesn't focus on the actual concurrence. There's also a long history in the black community and in the NAACP on all of the other equality issues, right? Whether it's fighting for non-discrimination in employment, whether it's fighting whether it's fighting for non-discrimination in healthcare. I mean, there's a lot, you go back and the history is there and it goes back, decades. There's also reality, and Chad and I have made this a priority, Ray Carey at the task force and I made this a priority. It's a reality that when you're an organizer, if you really want to turn a community, you got to invest in making relationships in that community, And I can say, as a guy who grew up with a boy as my brother, different moms, we were raised like this, only 2 little black boys in town, and spent every day together. And Jason was out of the closet at like 4. You know, he was dressing like Diana Ross and asking mom, why can't I go to school like this? You know, when we were 6. You know, and I was, you know, defending him on the playground. We were blessed to have a set of friends who were, you know, ready to go to blows if you picked on our buddy. But with that said, you know, when Jason moved to the Castro when we were 18 and he thought this was going to be heaven, he ran smack dab into straight up racism in a way that folks really weren't dealing with 20 years ago. And so I think that the kind of awkward situation of the black gay community, you know, is more complex and more two-dimensional, you know, with sort of its relative, the racism that historically has been there, and the homophobia in the black community, both have been factors. What I think is important is this. When the NAACP came out in support of marriage equality, you saw in Maryland the biggest jump of support in the black community that we had seen, much bigger than when President Obama came out. And I think you saw that jump for a reason. One, look, we're active in 1,200 communities, and our folks were ready and on message the next day. And folks were able to come to folks in their community and say, why did the NAACP make this change? And our folks were able to say, well, first, we were there on every other gay equality issue. 1. 2, every state except for 1, we've been on the right side, right? So we were already there. 3, let's be real clear about what's happening here. They're trying to encode discrimination to state constitutions and reverse like a 100-year pattern of using constitutions in our country to actually expand rights. And let's be real clear, we're black. So if you switch that tradition, if you switch that emotion, it's gonna get all of us. I mean, it'll get those of us who are gay right away, but it's eventually gonna get all of us. And that, I think people understanding this as a civil rights issue, that this is about R-I-G-H-T-S and not R-I-T-E-S, that it's about civil rights guaranteed by the 14th. It's not about religious ritual protected by the 1st. Your church can do whatever it wants. You can feel however you want. But our Constitution is very clear that no person can be mistreated based on what they are.
I think it's really important because, you know, I'm in California where, you know, Prop 8 passed, and it really passed with an overwhelming amount of support from religious people of color, from religious Mexicans and from religious black people. And it's been really important to me to talk about the fact that, and I think a lot of black people take exception to this parallel, but I do not. I'm married to a white man, and I'm in a marriage that would have been illegal, you know, a little over 40 years ago. And when I think about this issue, it's a very personal issue to me. No one should be able to tell me who I love, and the fact that I think that I should be able to marry who I want to marry, but somehow I'm going to deny that right to somebody else, is an outrage. And people want to say, well, gay rights are not the same as African American rights. It's exactly the same struggle for exactly the same rights, which is about being able to live in this country unencumbered and have the ability to pursue happiness in the way that you see fit. And so that's a parallel I've been trying to make in my conversations. the HRC was obviously successful in New York in getting marriage equality passed, and my friend Brian Ellner, who I went to college with, was instrumental in spearheading that effort. And we did a big campaign, and there were a lot of African American participants in that campaign, including some people who may have been atraditional when you think about it, Russell Simmons and Roger Avery and a bunch of athletes, Michael Strahan, people who, you know, and I think, Fry died and laid to the side. What's his name? Sharpton. So,
well, Sharpton's been there for a very long time.
Yeah, but I think
time.
these leaders that I think people would assume were falling down on the other side of this issue came out and publicly said that they weren't, and I think that has made a difference, and it will make a difference, because these two communities, the Latin religious community and the black religious community, are the two last communities that we need to win over.
Well, I mean,
I think that's my personal opinion.
Right? I mean, who was investing in property? The Mormon Church, right?
Well, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like every religious, again, we're organizers, and I think we have to talk as organizers and be straight as organizers. If you want somebody on your side, you got to go ask for it. What we saw here in North Carolina, where our folks were right out front fighting Prop 1 or whatever it was called. In Halifax County, northeast corner of the state, second poorest county in the state, one of the blackest counties in the state, 2-to-1 for marriage equality. Why? Because the NAACP has a strong presence, and because we got right up in folks' churches, and we talked about what this was and what this wasn't. And if we want to keep this momentum going, and for every Ellen there's a Wanda Sykes, and for every Anderson Cooper there's a Don Lemon, and those are important. But we've got to act like organizers. And we can't just simply say that religious folks are opposed, or religious blacks are opposed, or religious Latinos are opposed. I would say, people who we haven't talked to, people who we haven't engaged, are more likely to be confused and lost. People who we have engaged, people who we have talked to, people who we have helped think this through and separate how they may feel about, their personal decisions and how they feel about the Constitution, and have a lot more opportunity to actually make the right decision. And there's been organizing in the white community in this country. And I say this as somebody whose parents' marriage was illegal, right? Whose white family did disown them, and whose mom's black friends, many of them, didn't talk to her for 20 years. That you've got to engage both communities, and we've got to recognize that we've done a lot more investing on this issue in the white community historically than we have in the black, but there's a lot of potential. Because if Halifax County, in rural North Carolina, can go 2-to-1 for marriage equality, I would offer there's really not a county in this country with the right organizing, with the right level of investment that could go at least 50% plus one for marriage.
So Ben, wait. So since Ben, you brought up North Carolina, and there are 4 states that have ballot initiatives coming up in November. Chad, talk about those 4 states: Washington, Maryland, Maine, and Minnesota. Where are things with those ballot initiatives?
Absolutely.
And then, Anna, if you have any polling insights about where things might go, that'd be great. So, Chad.
Sure, absolutely. We have 4 real opportunities across the country, and it really does go from east to west, right? We have Maine, we have Maryland, we have Minnesota, and we have Washington. 3 of those states get us marriage equality if we win. And in Minnesota, we're defeating a hateful measure pushed forward by the ridiculously named National Organization for Marriage in that state. And it's the first time that we can really look at all 4 and see a path to victory. Not that we're going to win all 4, but that if we win one of them, we take away a talking point that the other side uses day in and day out in every single elected official office, whether it's local, state, or in Washington, in that capital. They walk in and they say, it's good and well that these guys talk about having a majority of the country supporting marriage equality and the polling state by state, but they've never won at the ballot box. This time we have the ability to win at the ballot box in all of those states. If we win in one of them, it will be significant, historic, and take away that talking point. And we really do have the ability to win in all of them. And we have our communities represented. It's always interesting when we talk about Latinos and the gay community, or African Americans in the LGBT community. The fact is, the LGBT community is the rainbow of colors. We are black, we are white, we are Latino, and we have work to do in every single one of those categories: white, black, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander. And if you look in those states, we have to do that work in order to win. We have smart campaigns in all 4 states. The Human Rights Campaign is supporting both in terms of staff and financial resources. All 4 of those efforts I'm working closely. In fact, listening to Ben speak, you can realize why the very first meeting I did in Washington when I took this job was with Ben, because I think making alliances like this is how we win. It's how we win. It's how we undermine what the other side does by dropping in last minute with their ridiculous advertising campaign, mailed and radio, with their hate and with their lies, by building these relationships and having the conversation with voters, with all of the voters. And the research shows that we are winning them increasingly, including, by the way, Republicans. When we talk about reaching across the aisle, yes, we need to be LGBT and straight joined in these efforts, but we also need to be Democrat, Republican, and independent. Those who are in the Capitol in Washington have a tremendous amount of catching up to do with the Republicans on Capitol Hill, have a tremendous amount of catching up to do with the actual Republicans in their party. Because if you look across the board, Republicans are increasingly supporting all of these issues, including marriage equality, and we need to do more. We need Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about Republicans in a second, but Anna, he's very hopeful about the 4 states. Is he right to be that hopeful?
Of course.
But real,
say no.
for real. Given the polling and the data.
Right, so across the 4 states, depending on the survey, there's anywhere from about 48 to 52% are supportive of equality, whether it's a yes or no vote, it depends on the state.
Right.
And I think that combined with presidential year turnout, which is enormously important, we should never do these campaigns in non-presidential years, where you have a much higher, for example, youth vote, which while is underperforming relative to the president on these issues is, off the charts. And then in places like Washington, you have other things going on. So, there's a legalization measure, pot legalization measure in Washington state, for example. And there are other things, in Minnesota, you have a completely tarnished and discredited state Republican Party. So in every state, there are dynamics going on that I think help sort of the Democratic ticket, which helps this issue because it's about who's turning out and how they're voting down the ballot. But they're going to be very close. It is much easier to get a no vote than a yes vote because people get scared and uncomfortable and nervous, and they might think they'll do it, and then at the last minute they say, no, I can't get myself to do it. And we find in polls that usually people who say they're undecided are actually against equality, and they don't really want to say it out loud. It's not sort of PC. So we should always be, when we see a poll that has 50 or 52, we just have to remember that there are some people not telling the truth in our surveys, and that we have to get every single vote. The other thing I would say is that there is more intensity on the right. So there are a lot of people who support equality, but it's not a very important issue to them. And one of the things that we have to do in our campaigns, in addition to trying to sort of convince people who are against, which is hard, is actually make sure the people who support equality actually go out and vote on it and vote down the ballot. There's something called ballot roll-off where you vote at the top and then you don't vote on the rest of the ballot, especially in these states that have a huge number of initiatives, making sure they go and cast that vote. So they're very complex campaigns. They're going to be very close. I think we're poised to win at least one, but I will not predict which one that would be.
Campbell, you've been dying to get in.
I just want to add a point, and this made me very optimistic. There's a man named Michael Klarman, who's not an activist. He's a constitutional law professor at Harvard. And he has a book coming out in September called From the Closet to the Altar that's a history of the movement overall. But he wrote this great op-ed in the LA Times that was called "The War is Over, but the Fighting Continues." And his point was you can't, at the end of the day, ignore the trend lines. And it goes to what you said and what you said earlier, which is every time another person comes out of the closet, it converts people because you can't discriminate against someone you love. And the more and more that people feel comfortable, even in small towns across America, coming out of the closet, that generationally you cannot ignore where we are headed. Right. And even in this moment, it may feel challenging at times with certain ballot initiatives, whether you're going to win here or there. But over the long haul, I truly feel so optimistic about this. I cannot believe that my 2 young sons are going to grow up in a world where when they're 20 years old, they're 3 and 4 now, this is even going to be an issue. I don't even think we're going to be talking about it. Am I wrong? I mean, I hope I'm not, but tell me.
But I want to ask you guys a question, you two a question, and you specifically, John, on this point, because I feel like there is an inevitability, that there is an inevitability to where we are going to be in 10 or 20 years, which is that I think it's right now between 52 and 54% of all Americans agree that we should have marriage equality. But when you speak to young people, it's in the 70s, in the high 70s. Right. And so that the fight, it's not that we need to relax and wait, but it is, what is true is we need to fight this fight now, but that we will succeed is inevitable. So I guess I'm curious about how you feel about the state of the LGBT fight in terms of where you see it in 5 or 10 years and what we can be doing now to accelerate that movement forward. I mean, it's one thing to get out young people, but there are young people now who aren't going to be voting yet. But beyond that, it is converting Republicans. And I think when you talk about the concept of equality and freedom, personal freedom, you believe in personal freedom, but only for people who agree with you, then their argument becomes, it's mooted.
Well, Aisha, that gets to the question I was going to ask Campbell, because you've praised HRC in the past for reaching out to both sides to get people, to get Democrats and Republicans to focus on LGBT equality and LGBT rights. What's it going, and I'll just throw this out to Chad and Anna and anyone else who wants to jump in. what is it going to take to get the Republican Party, the Republicans in Washington, as you rightly pointed out, Chad, to get the Republicans in Washington to realize that their party and the country is moving not slowly, but at a full trot towards marriage equality? What's it going to take?
It's already happening. I mean, I would say, and let me be clear, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm an independent, and I am a pragmatist above all. I care about marriage equality. I want to win. I know. I'm guessing most people here are. But I want to win on this issue. And I think Chad does too. And I believe that HRC has been tactically smarter than almost any other advocacy organization operating in Washington, because they have not been partisan about their approach to this. And I'll give you an example. I was actually writing a piece about Planned Parenthood and my frustration, because I'm also pro-choice, at Planned Parenthood focusing solely on Democrats, and I felt like that was putting their funding at risk, because
I'm on the board for Planned Parenthood, and that's not entirely true, but we can have that
That's
conversation.
another panel. That would require another moderator.
A single Republican in this campaign.
We do have pro-choice Republican partners.
Okay.
But okay, well,
Sorry,
that's
LGBT.
a separate
Totally
debate.
different, totally different
But the
conversation.
point is, there's not a purity test with HRC. And I'll give you an example. Susan Collins,
Right. Senator
a
from
moderate Republican senator from Maine, who's pro-choice, not actually pro-marriage equality, but you guys met with her. She told me the story. You didn't tell me the story. She said, they met with me, they talked to me. I'm not 100% marriage equality, but I feel like my state is moving in that direction, that there are other areas where I can work with them. And you built a relationship with her, and she developed a very strong relationship with the organization. And when it came time to overturn Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Susan Collins led the effort to get those 7 Republicans who were necessary to make that happen. You cannot change at the legislative level. You cannot change things without bipartisan support. We are never going to have a country where you have a Democratic majority and a Democratic president, where a veto-proof majority. It is so rare that that happens. On the Democratic side, on the Republican side, we have to be able to work together, and if you cannot bring Republicans over, it's not going to happen. Gay marriage passed in New York because 4 Republicans crossed over, and they did it because a lot of big Republican donors stepped up and put pressure on them to do it.
Look, all the talk about the demographic shifts and where young people are worries me. I think that it's true. I know young black folks who are straight, for whom this is their issue. And, they, up in Massachusetts, I got a call from a friend who was bragging about his son. That group that shows up to protest soldiers' funerals and just kind of nasty God hates gays.
Westboro Baptist.
I wasn't going to say their name. But,
yeah, exactly. That group
Voldemort
showed up to protest protest this high school's prom because they have an inclusive prom. And the kids organized on Facebook and surrounded the group and shamed them and made them leave their high school. And all those signs are good. But we have to understand this. 2 things. One, what that means is that the other side has their back up against the wall and they're going to fight like hell. And second, we've been there in sort of demographic shift battles with the far right, progressives. We've been there 100 years ago. What got us the Chinese Exclusion Act? What got us 40 years of attempts of using the law to suppress the vote after the Civil War? What got us, constitutional amendments like in Virginia? In Virginia, there's this little constitutional amendment that frustrates my life. It's called, it bans formerly incarcerated people from voting. Okay? But understand it was put there to suppress the black vote, because after the Civil War, they were using incarceration to basically control poor black men. And the plan that they put it in, they were trying to run people like my grandmother's grandfather out of office. He was a state senator in Virginia late in Reconstruction. And when they put that plan in place, The argument made on the floor of the Constitutional Convention, the Jim Crow Constitutional Convention in Virginia, was because of this plan, the darky will be eliminated as a factor in our state's politics in the next 5 years. What were they afraid of? They were afraid of, if you will, a black Virginia. They were afraid of demographic shifts. And so they went to state constitutions to change the law in ways that still affect us today. And they went to suppress the vote. And that's what we're looking at right now. And so we have to be sort of furiously focused on stopping any attempts to encode discrimination to state constitutions, because if they win that, it'll be with us long after the demographic shift. And we have to understand that when they attack the black vote, when they attack the Latino vote, when they attack the student vote, that they're attacking the demographic shifts. And that all of us have a very keen interest, and this is why I'm proud that HRC and that the task force have joined us in fighting voter suppression, that we have a keen interest in making sure that there are no barriers to those demographic shifts.
Yeah, if I could just say,
Chad and then Anna.
yeah. I want to go back to one other thing, because I think we can overemphasize the positive. I mean, we're barely over 50%. We have 50 states in this country, 6 have marriage equality. More than half of the states in this country do not have workplace protections for LGBT people. We are a long ways from having full equality in this country. And the pace at which we get there actually matters. We just finished a survey of more than that we worked with the Greenberg firm on, over 10,000 LGBT youth in the country, and we compared it to a sample size of their straight peers. When you ask LGBT teenagers what their top 3 concerns are in life, they are coming out of the closet, bullying, and unaccepting families. Those are the top 3 concerns, not in this area, the top 3 life concerns, period. When you ask straight teenagers their top 3 concerns, graduating from high school, getting into college, and their job. Now, LGBT people have to worry about those 3 things too, but they're pushed down here to second-tier issues. Think about the impact that has on an LGBT teenager. So we can never say, let's just wait on the young people to become voting age and let's wait on the elder population to move on, because think about the consequences of that young person that's living in Charlotte or in my home state of Arkansas that every single day is bullied in his or her home, on the streets of their neighborhood, in their church. The consequences of that are severe and oftentimes tragic. And that's why we have to work even harder now than we have been in the 5 years. Now that we've had some success, we have to push the pedal to the metal and get this job done for those LGBT young people.
Anna?
It's actually a really extraordinary study, so I encourage folks to go to your website and look at it. And one of the things that Chad was talking about, which is right, is that in terms of consequences, LGBT youth are consistently less happy, think they have to leave their hometowns in order to be happy. There's obviously even worse consequences, though we didn't ask about that in the survey. But to go back to the Republican question for a minute, part of what's happening on the right is that the issue is becoming less important to some of the more mainstream white evangelical denominations and groups. Obviously, NAACP is funded by the Mormon Church, and that's its own sort of set of issues. But what you see is in what the traditional Christian right looks like outside of the Mormon Church, the abortion issue is a much higher priority, and there are many people on the right who think this is a long-term losing issue for them. And I did a survey about 4 years ago where we looked at white evangelicals under the age of 30, and about 70% supported some kind of relationship recognition. They were about 30-40% on marriage and the rest on civil unions, but the point is that, that just supporting any kind of relationship recognition is basically at odds with where most of their churches are. So there is the kind of changing demographics issue, but there's also, I think, less energy on the right, though it doesn't feel like it right now because back's against the wall, so they're fighting and fighting. But you will see, I think, fewer and fewer resources going to these fights on the right over time as they rather deal with the abortion issue because they know they're on the wrong side of history.
That was my question. It wasn't about waiting. It was about what do we do now to accelerate this movement forward, because we know that on the progressive side that we have overwhelming support. How do we, it's great to hear that there's less enthusiasm for this fight on the Republican side, but when you look at their platform, it is incredibly anti-gay. You know what I mean? It's anti-marriage equality. It's in their platform.
They want a constitutional,
it's not
constitutional
hidden.
amendment.
They want to make a constitutional amendment banning gay marriage. And so, to me, if there was a purity test for engaging on the other side, it wouldn't be like, hey, how do you feel about marriage equality? We know how you feel about a marriage equality as a group. You've said it, you've stated it in no uncertain terms. You want to ban it with a constitutional amendment. That doesn't mean that we don't treat with the other side, but how do we engage? And I'm talking nationally and also personally with a group of people who when you say that you're against marriage equality, to me, what falls out of that is all of the other positions that you hold in terms of equality for other groups. That you don't believe that gays are equal, that you don't believe that, that women are equal. Those positions are in their platform.
Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, that portion of the platform looks much more like the platform of 1812 instead of 2012. There's no question. The good news is that platform is out of touch with the vast majority of Republicans, the actual voters in the party. That platform was written by outrageous, hateful activists who claim credit for writing that portion of the platform.
And who hijacked that party,
and it should be condemned day in and day out. Having said that, across the board on those ridiculous issues that found their way into that platform, the Republican Party across this country does not agree with those issues. They absolutely do not. In fact, you're seeing more and more fair-minded Republicans be vocal about their disagreement.
Wait, so Chad, then how do we, and when I say we, I mean the country, get to a point where the Republican Party platform actually reflects the Republican Party?
Yeah. Well, I said this yesterday when I was talking to Andrew Mitchell. We'll see if it turns out to be true. But I hope and believe that this just might be the last time we have a presidential candidate, the major two parties, who has such extreme differences on this issue. We will reach the day when there are no differences between the two lead candidates as it relates to equality in this country. It's going to happen. Whether it happens in 4 years, 8 years, I don't know. The differences right now are extreme. But what we have to do is lift the voices. By the way, I'm a liberal, progressive Democrat, I should say. But I did spend much of the last 4 years of my life working with two people, Ted Olson and David Boies. I never thought there was a single issue in life that I would agree with Ted Olson on. And perhaps there's still only one. But we found one. And we found a way to work together and to work with him and to elevate his voice so that others will follow. And whether it's, Paul Singer, who's, a huge Romney supporter and Republican and generous donor to equality issues, or people like Laura Bush, those voices matter. And we need to do more to elevate them. And we need to support, by the way. We must support those 4 Republicans who voted for marriage equality. We wouldn't have gotten marriage equality without those Republicans in New York State. Immediately, NAACP announced a $1 million effort to recall them. And Democrats from around the country came together to support those 4 Republicans. So we have to be there with them when they're there for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's to Chad's
Campbell.
point very quickly. It's when I talk about a purity test, it's HRC not having a purity test, being willing not to say, Republicans, the platform, we can't even talk to these people, we can't even deal with these people. It's finding individuals you can deal with in order to make change happen now, as opposed to waiting for the inevitable. It's making it happen in New York and making it happen at the legislative level.
Well, I think, the Republican Party, I wrote a piece last week because Logo Television did a poll with Harris Interactive that I thought had a very illuminating stat that no one else paid attention to except Egghead me. The question was, if Mitt Romney and President Obama had the same stances, same positions on LGBT issues, would you be more likely or less likely to vote for Mitt Romney? And 20% of the self-identified LGBT respondents said yes, they would be more likely to vote for Mitt Romney. 60% of LGBT respondents said that they would vote for President Obama because of his stances. If Mitt Romney and Barack Obama had the same stance, you take that 20% out, they are tied. And in a country where both candidates are shaking the trees for every available vote, the Republican Party is leaving votes on the table.
Yeah, no question.
And so if you didn't know that stat, I mean, I really think you should know that, because a lot of people think that there aren't any gay Republicans and there shouldn't be any gay Republicans, which I think is ridiculous. So, just to your point that Republicans who support LGBT issues and rights should be supported. That's just my editorial comment.
We did some survey work with HRC in the LGBT community, and one of the things that you find is that while obviously these issues are incredibly important to LGBT individuals, they also are as likely, if not more likely, worried about job security, access to health care, affording transportation, education, and housing. And there are lots of ways in which, for example, domestic partnership or civil union laws in places where you would not get marriage actually would be incredibly helpful because your partner could get benefits, etc. So I think sometimes we tend to caricature the LGBT community as only caring about these issues. But in fact, like everybody else, living lives, struggling with work and family, dealing with job insecurity, etc. And in some ways even more so for some of the reasons that Chad has talked about. And so in that vein, it's not surprising that there are some gay Republicans because, the LGBT community is diverse politically. There's lots of things people care about. It's not just about these equality issues, though they're obviously very important.
I'm so glad to see Ben raise his hand, because I was going to say he's awfully quiet. Ben.
What I would say is this. I think Chad's work with Ted Olson and Boyce is inspiring. And I think we need more work like that. We in the civil rights community have a responsibility to make sure that there's not ever an anti-black party or an anti-gay party or an anti-woman party, or you get the picture. And we actually have to work to make our Republican allies on issues by issue visible. Because what starts to happen is that the people then get more comfortable being visible on more than one issue. Grover Norquist has started up with me against mass incarceration, for example. And in that conversation, we realized that he also shares our concern about the death penalty in this country. And again, if we know our history, we know then that the story that Norm Mineta tells about coming back from the internment camps as a child and sitting around with the elders in the community. And the elders saying, we can never allow there to be an anti-Japanese party again. And so we're going to pass the hat, and everybody's going to put in money, and we're going to send our young people to both parties. We're going to split them up. We're going to send one group every year to the Republicans, and one group every year to the Democrats. And the punchline is Norm's happy that he was in the group of kids who were sent to the Democrats, right? But the reality is that there were similar strategies in the black community after World War II to make sure that we had presence in both parties. And that's why we were able to pass civil rights legislation as easily as we did in the 50s and the 60s. We've got to go back to actually having a strategy, not for making civil rights supporters, even issue by issue, visible who are Republicans, but ultimately have a long game for making sure that neither party can ever get to a place. Because in the last 100 years, my organization has seen the Democrats be the anti-black party, and we've seen a Republican Party that's now getting zero support from the black community for their major candidate, and only had 48 black delegates at the convention.
That many?
All right, And so we, this is a short-term project, but it has to be a long-term project too.
And on that note, I want to thank our panel for being here. A couple of them have to go right now. It's 11 o'clock. Thank you so much. Chad Griffin, Campbell Brown, Ben Jealous, Aisha Tyler, Anna Greenberg. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Hope to see you again.